The following show is brought to you in partnership with the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History, Blue Star Strategies, Bright Road Incorporated, Make It Plain Podcast, and RPC Media.
From the campus of the University of the District of Columbia, this is State of Play.
Welcome to State of Play. I'm Sharon Pratt, and with me is Karen Tramontano. And our topic today, the pandemic or post-pandemic, as we talk about the human and work-related hiccups and possible residuals resulting from the pandemic. We have an extraordinary expert with us, Edward Montgomery. He's the president of Western Michigan University. He was formerly the dean and a professor at McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown, and he was also with both the Clinton and Obama administration. What an honor to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So a lot of conversation is occurring around life will never be the same, work will never be the same. What's your sense of it?
I think that there will certainly be some parts of work which will change. I think this pandemic made people go through profound transformations in terms of where they worked, how they scheduled their work day. And I think both workers and employers realize that some parts of the new relationships weren't bad. So I would expect in the near term, more people will come back to work, but they won't come back 9 to 5, 5 days a week in the same way as they did in the past.
So where do you see those more dramatic shifts taking place at present?
Right now, of course, the economy is still on the path back to full recovery. It went through a profound downturn. A downturn that was mainly located in the service and tourism and recreation industry, hospitality industries. And so we're still not fully recovered. There's still a way to go in terms of the economy turnaround. That was felt very intensely by women, and it was felt very intensely by Blacks and Hispanics.
President Montgomery, have you seen this level of disruption in the labor market before?
Yeah, this is an unusual recession. You know, if you think of the Great Recession, which is the one we just lived with, that was driven initially, obviously, by a financial panic and banking problems. And then it was felt first in the manufacturing sectors. The recovery was very slow, took a while to get going and to return to normal. It was a long, deep recession, led manufacturing, slow recovery. This one is very different. It's very deep drop in output, very rapid rise in unemployment, and very rapid recovery to a large degree, and not driven by manufacturing or construction, the usual cyclical industries, but driven by services.
The pandemic really hit African Americans and women in the workforce quite hard. And can you talk about what you see as the trend for women and workers of color to return to work? And what do you see as the timeline? Fortunately,
they have benefited some from the rebound. Their unemployment rates have come down. They have not fully recovered. Their employment, the share of them employed have come back up. Again, they're not fully there. I think a key thing will be whether schools reopen in the fall, whether childcare becomes available, because that sector got hit. Similarly, we're seeing people in the hospitality industry. Well, many of those workers left the sector. There was no place to be employed. Will they come back? And so that getting that full recovery may depend on those answers to that key questions. Does the child care industry come back? Is it available? Is it affordable as it was before? And then can we induce service workers, particularly hospitality, restaurants, to come back to a sector that was always a bit tenuous because the wages weren't necessarily that high. And so we're seeing some pressure on, and we finally see that servers and waitresses and others in the hospitality industry get long overdue wage increases.
Well, you see a lot of workers saying they won't come back to the hospitality industry, won't come back to, let's say, restaurant opportunities unless they get at least the $15 minimum wage per hour. Is that an achievable objective, and can restaurant owners make that work?
We haven't had an increase in the minimum wage from $7.25 in a decade. So there's a long way between $7.25 and 15. And so I think that a more livable, achievable wage, $11, $12 an hour, is likely for the rest of the country and is doable.
So President Biden has pushed providing some type of subsidies, I gather, for care providers, whether it be for elders or children. Do you think that's essential to turning it around, especially for the women who've been hit?
Yeah, I think this is a sector that has been hit. It was before the pandemic came. Were people happy with daycare? Was it readily available? Was it affordable? The answer we would all say is no. Now the pandemic has made what was not a great situation even more of a challenge. And so I think it's appropriate to think about what kinds of subsidies can you put for providers to help them hire and retain and train good daycare workers, and then also to make it affordable to parents on the other end so that it becomes a viable option to allow them to return to the labor market.
Now, a lot has been written about how the extra unemployment benefits during the pandemic has somehow incentivized workers not to go to work and has somehow distorted the labor market. What do you think about that?
When we first put these extra boosts in, there was no place to come back to. So I think if you think about the course of time with shutdowns and closures, that was a much needed bridge. Now the question is, as the economy gets better, as more openings become available, is it time to start phasing out the supplemental dollars or ending them? People always complain when labor markets don't give them cheap supply of workers. And so maybe part of the solution to it isn't to get rid of the unemployment benefits and make people have to live on less money, but to raise the wage a little bit.
You've given us great insight, and I think you probably were referring to the Biden administration doing some of this. You've worked with so many administrations, which is quite a compliment for all of us to have you here with us today. Thank you so very much. You've certainly given us a clearer picture about what's going on in the labor market, and we can't thank you enough for being on State of Play.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
So welcome back to State of Play. We heard from President Ed Montgomery, and he gave us a sense of the post-pandemic labor market. And now we're going to focus on people's attitudes, especially attitudes of African Americans in making the decision to go back to work. And with us for that conversation is Miss Monica Torres. She's a journalist and she writes for the Huffington Post Life, and she's been writing about workplace issues for quite a long time. So thank you for joining us, Miss Torres.
Thank you for having me, Karen.
So I want to jump right into one of your articles where you wrote about a survey of the Future Forum. And could you tell us about the survey and some of the takeaways?
Yep. Future Forum is a research group. They interviewed 5,000 U.S. professionals this summer, and they found that Black professionals in particular were the group most likely to want a remote or hybrid experience where you get to work from home at least a couple days a week, because they have found that they are the only ones now at their workplace. And this is what the researchers from the Future Forum group were saying, is that being the only one is a burden. It is a toll to be the representative of your culture, of your race, of your ethnicity, and to deal with that on a daily basis. And working from home can assist with that, of not having that physical reminder day in and day out. One
of the things in your reporting that was sort of counterintuitive for me, you said that especially African Americans, had a sense of belonging, a better sense of belonging when they were not in the office. And so what is driving that, at least in your reporting and from what you saw in the survey?
From what the Black professionals I've spoken with, it's that when you get to work from home, you just are able to be more productive because your brain space is freed up from having to have the gaze of others constantly on you, particularly the gaze of white people who may not necessarily agree with you. I talked with one Black professional who had to deal with coworkers who did not believe in Black Lives Matter. And she told me she was grateful she did not have to deal with that in person or this past summer when she was remote. And even that Black professional herself, Christina, who's a software engineer, told me that ultimately she would like to go to an office where she could feel like welcomed by everyone she worked with. But until she gets to that point, she would rather work from home.
So you also have reported on benefits that businesses should provide, and you identified 4 benefits that aren't the typical ones. So could you tell us about those?
I think there are ones that are being overlooked at this point, such as caregiving benefits, which can not just help working parents, but also caregivers of elderly family members. Another one would be disability leave for people who are dealing with long COVID, a rapidly growing population, unfortunately. I think a third one would be around student loan repayment assistance, which could help many people who are unfortunately dealing with the crippling debt of student loans. And then I think those are just like great starting points for people to start thinking about.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Torres. These are great insights, and you've really helped move this discussion into a very good place for all of us at State of Play. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Karen.
Welcome back to State of Play, where Karen and I have been drilling down on the sphere of the pandemic and its impact and post-pandemic impact on work choices, work experiences. And we have with us now someone who's had a unique set of experiences and very special insights, Dr. Monica Cox. Dr. Monica Cox was the very first African-American woman to receive tenure in engineering at Purdue University. She's a professor of engineering education at Ohio State University, and she's also a career and authenticity coach. What an honor to have you with us.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here today.
A great many African Americans are reluctant to come back to the office. They feel that they're more productive at home, and the reason being is that the office environment, the work environment, is often so toxic, so hostile. Has that been something that you've seen and witnessed, particularly as an African-American woman in the sphere of engineering?
Unfortunately, I have experienced that as an African-American woman in an environment that has not had many African-American women and people of color, women of color before me. I think that this happens because oftentimes the infrastructure is not prepared for the experiences and the perspectives of people and women of color who come in. So unfortunately, it is really understandable why people want to be in environments that they've prepared in the comfort of their own homes, and also away from many of the experiences that they might have in an environment that isn't always welcoming.
So, Dr. Cox, you've created a platform, as I understand it, to help people to, I think, manage their work environment and make decisions around their work environment. Could you walk us through some of your ideas and suggestions?
Yes, I created a brand under the Dr. Monica Cox brand because I realized that when I would attend meetings or conferences, I would often hear women of color who spoke about issues that they faced 20, 30, 40 years ago. And they were very similar to what I am hearing graduate students and faculty and just people across all disciplines. I wanted to create a brand that address some of the issues that I have never had solutions to as a faculty member. The Trajectory is what I have created. You can find that on Facebook. And it's just a place to have authentic conversations. It's a place where we can be ourselves and we can find new ways to engage and to be free.
Well, Dr. Cox, it would appear that the pandemic has pulled off the covers around a lot of issues, especially issues of racism. Do you think that any of our institutional leadership, government, academe, are really aware of the level of racism that is just a part of the fabric of everyday existence?
I think it's interesting that you use the word awareness, because I think across all of the environments that you mentioned, it's not that people aren't always aware of what's going on, because in fact, it's sometimes the worst kept secret about what is going on. It's the culture where people know, where the bodies are buried, so to speak. But I think that it oftentimes comes back to people not really having a roadmap or a blueprint or knowing what to do consistently. What we see with the microaggressions and with some of the things that people say are more subtle and are not so black or white is that people just sometimes turn the other way. There's often silence, and you'll see people in leadership who are very much aware of what is happening, yet they do not step up. The people in the environment who see what's happening say it's not their problem. And you can continue to see the problems that really are systemic, but also are very dangerous for people who do not benefit from the privilege and sometimes the power that is prevalent in these environments.
Are you working with, I guess, what I would describe as, both ends of the situation? So are you talking to in your platform work, in your consulting work, are you talking to the people who are making the decisions and need to be aware, as well as the victims of these microaggressions in the workplace?
Yes, this is the part of my brand that is really amazing to me. When I first started, I knew that I would focus on women of color and helping women of color who were the first or the onlys or just pioneers in their environments. I thought that based upon my past experiences, I would have an opportunity to mentor them and coach them and just really provide some insights based upon my experience. But what I found was that people reached out to me across all of my social media platforms, and they started emailing me, thanking me about the words that I am presenting, thanking me about being bold, thanking me for starting conversations that are not happening. What I found is that it's not just women of color, it's men. There are people around the world who want to chime in, who want to just really learn more about this. And I would say the murder of George Floyd was this catalyst that woke people up, and it made people realize that regardless of our environment, it's not just our neighborhoods, it's not just criminal justice, but in our environments, in our workplaces, we need to really examine what is happening and how we are engaging with each other. Because at the end of the day, we want to be free, even as we work, even as we engage and do the thing that we have been called to do in our professional environments.
Well, you're an example. I mean, you got tenure as the first African-American woman. How did you do that?
Yeah, tenure is one of those milestones of academia, of course. I would say that it is something that I was prepared to do. When I think about the professional development training that I had in engineering and in higher education, I learned how to write grants. I learned how to do the work of being a professor. But although I did that, I often said that I was prepared to be a professor, but I was not prepared to be a pioneer. And it's that part that really made me aware of how many things were missing in higher education and how people were not prepared to work with me as a Black woman, and how different my culture was from the culture of other people. I knew that I was not protected from the environment just because of tenure. I knew that this was a space that wasn't necessarily built with people of color in mind. What has happened is that I've learned that you have to push boundaries. Once you are in that room, once you are looking at those promotion and tenure documents, you have an obligation. When you have that seat, when you have that voice, you are no longer there to just play the game. You're there to change the game.
How do you know when it's time to leave? I mean, I admire you for all that you just outlined, but sometimes it might be just time to leave. How do you know?
I love this question because it is the core of what I have learned for years. What I've discovered is that it is about wholeness. It is about making sure that you are in the space and in that zone where you leave your organization whole. When you're in an organization, we need to see it for what it is. It is a system with infrastructure, and it's established to be a certain way. We are renters and we are leasers in those organizations. You do not own the organization. And so when those changes happen, you have to decide, do your values align with those shifts? And what do you have to do to make sure that you come out of that organization on the other side whole?
Well, we can't thank you enough for your rich, rich insights, and so very much for sharing them here on State of Play.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Welcome back to State of Play, where Karen and I have been doing a deep dive into how the pandemic and even post-pandemic has impacted career decisions. And so we have with us now two extraordinary women who sort of underscore how significant, how profound some of these choices were. They are Carmen, Diane, and Kara Still, who are the co-founders of Prosperity Market. What a joy to have both of you with us.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask each of you to sort of explain briefly what you were doing prior to the pandemic. Why don't we begin with you, Carmen?
Okay. Pre-pandemic, I was a makeup artist. I was working in TV and film and commercial.
How about you, Kara?
I am in the fashion design industry. So I was doing freelance and working for a company doing women's fashion design, actually.
So I'm going to ask each of you, tell us, how did the pandemic impact your life?
Well, it brought it to a screeching halt. I mean, all in one day, every job I had lined up canceled. I mean, I was actually on a travel job, and they sent us packing home. I came back. I missed the store, so everyone was out of toilet paper, and it was just, I came home to a pandemic.
I actually was kind of looking to transition to be able to do more of something for myself. And I was doing some like collaborative design work with a friend of mine, and we had events lined up to do, and then everything shut down. So it was like, oh, we're doing these like design events and going to be selling things and all kinds of stuff. And all of that just came to a stop. And so it was really like, okay, what now?
So you have both started Prosperity Market. I'm going to ask you two questions. What is Prosperity Market, and why the shift from being a fashion designer, a makeup artist, to a market?
Sure. So Prosperity Market is a mobile farmers market and food truck on wheels that supports Black farmers, vendors, and food entrepreneurs.
So this is like if you're going to do lasagna or gnocchi, or you want to do pancakes or French toast.
And we travel throughout LA, creating a platform that makes it easy for people to shop Black businesses, as well as creating food access in our communities.
We landed on Prosperity Market, a farmer's market, because during the pandemic, we are hearing all of these statistics about Black businesses closing. They say 41% of Black businesses closed. We're just learning more about our economy, our economics, and we wanted to contribute there. And we landed on food because we realized that there was such a big gap when it comes to grocery stores. We don't have enough Black-owned grocery stores, and the ones that we do have are few and far between.
So you both had successful careers, and then the pandemic hit. Now, I know you don't go from losing a job to starting a market. So tell our audience what happened, what was the journey? Give us the details.
It was a really long journey. I spent a lot of time on my couch, finally decided to pick up a book, and but I picked up really powerful revolutionary books. So I was kind of in this mindset of creating impact, economic impact, and then the world witnessed the murder of George Floyd. And being that I wasn't working and I was doing nothing but sitting on the couch, I just observed it so differently than all of the previous incidents that we've all witnessed. And I felt like I needed to create an economic impact. I felt like my contribution should be creating economic impact. And I didn't know what that meant or what that would look like. And Kara and I were in constant communication, talking through all of these emotions. And we kind of landed on Prosperity Market because we witnessed, one, the push to support Black businesses. We're happy to see that, but we realized that there was a gap when it comes to food businesses. So we wanted to make it more accessible to support our Black farmers and also to create food access, because we're learning a lot about food insecurity, and there are so many communities that don't have grocery stores.
For me, it was a similar journey. Like Carmen said, we were in constant communication with everything from, like, before the parks closed down, we were still hiking and talking about Netflix, to really the emotional, trying journey of George Floyd. And I spent a lot of time trying to process for myself what that looked like. Lots of tears and being really uncertain and unsure, and having conversations with friends too about what they were doing to process. And even through that, actually, Carmen and I did a little bit of volunteer work with a local community organization. And that was one of the ways that we actually made some of the connections of farmers that we have now. And so it really was like, what does this look like? How can I make a difference beyond protest? Some core, like at the root, how can we support each other is kind of where Prosperity Market was born from.
So Carmen and Kara, you both are very successful professionals, one as a makeup artist, another as a fashion designer, and now you've taken on this mammoth enterprise, exciting enterprise of a food market on wheels, no less. How do you feel now? Are you going to try to do both? Where's your priorities? How do you reconcile all of this?
Prosperity Market is the focus. It is the full-time job that we are not yet getting paid for. So, doing work on the side, balancing the two, it definitely can be challenging, because Prosperity Market is where we spend our time. Until we're able to say, hey, this supports us, we do whatever it takes. And I know personally, I do what it takes so that I can support my life and Prosperity Market, and everything, like all the ideas we have that expand from it are where we're going.
Yeah, 100% Prosperity Market is the focus. It was a decision that I didn't even know I made. It just kind of took over. I didn't realize I was moving away from makeup, but Prosperity Market just became the main focus. But I do still do makeup, and I like to say I still have skills and I still have bills. So I still take jobs.
So do you have a website, where people can go and donate or invest with Prosperity Market?
Yes, you can find us at prosperitymarketla.com.
What you're doing is terrific, and it's very much needed. You have a market beyond even the Black community because people want fresh produce. So I think it's just a beautiful, brilliant concept. Thank you for sharing your story with all of us here on State of Play.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to State of Play, where Karen and I are doing a deep dive on the post-pandemic dynamic, particularly how it impacts worker. But as we reflect on it, we want to get a sense of the spiritual state of mind, the psychological state of mind. And so we have Reverend Ronald Hopson. He is an associate professor of psychology and of divinity at Howard University with a joint appointment to the departments of psychology as well as to the School of Divinity. It's such an honor to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
So we've been pondering and reflecting on how workers have been impacted, whether they want to come back to work. If they come back to work, what hourly rate, what kind of lifestyle they want. Have you seen any of this evidenced in the spiritual realm or the psychological realm?
We certainly have. There are clearly higher rates of psychological distress. Stress rates are higher. People are reporting more stress. There are more calls into phone lines that handle emergencies as well as handle people in distress. Depression, loneliness, isolation. It's on the increase. We've seen divorce, reports of filings increase, as well as, of course, alcoholism and substance abuse. Also, unfortunately, there's been an increase in reported intimate partner violence. The rates of reporting went down for a while during the middle phase of the pandemic, but now it's on the increase, child abuse and intimate partner abuse and violence, as people have been stuck in their homes, often with their abusers, for protracted periods of time and not been in contact with the public, which has occasioned more opportunity for the abuse to be hidden. So these things are all indicators of a kind of real distress, as well as, of course, on the spiritual dimension. Questions about whether religious communities will gather again and how will that happen, and people having to use other resources, a lot of turning to meditation and to Eastern tradition practices, as well as, of course, the continued gathering of churches and synagogues and places of worship and mosques online. All of those things indicate that there's also been a kind of spiritual jolt that has happened as an occasion of the pandemic.
Well, you know, this is just me, but to me, it has been almost spiritual, where we previously were so consumed with our own lives, what we were going to do next, how we had to get this done, not as reflective and concerned about our neighbor and certainly anybody else in any part of the globe. And suddenly comes along this invisible pathogen that brings us all to our knees, transfixed by it. Do you see this, or do you think others have seen this as almost a spiritual epiphany?
Well, yes, I have thought of it as a kind of existential overwhelm, where we have been thrust into an unanticipated encounter with our own limits, with the limits of our finitude, with our impotence about being able to do anything. As you say, the invisible enemy that we cannot even see. And of course, the ultimate limit of death, and how death can come at any time to anyone from any place. And we can no longer deny that. And so these things, even people who would not consider themselves spiritual, these are spiritual issues of ultimate concern, issues of what grounds us. So I think that has really been brought to the fore in this situation of pandemic. What is going to be important to you? What are the possibilities for your life, and how have those been circumscribed? What can you tolerate that you never knew you could tolerate? You could live in the house with your spouse or your partner 24/7. Who would have thought, when you didn't have to do that before? So in so many ways, we've come up against this existential overwhelm that has a clear spiritual underlay, even if people don't call it that.
So, Reverend Hopson, we know that African Americans and people of color were hardest hit by the pandemic. How do you see, and what are you hearing about people having to now return to so-called normal? What are the struggles that people are going through?
Right. Well, I think that part of the challenge is for people who have been traditionally marginalized and have lived on the margins, or people who have been excluded from the benefits of the society. What does normal mean when everything has been disrupted? And those of us who are fortunate enough to have simply been inconvenienced in a major way, but our incomes have continued and our jobs have continued and even our lifestyles have continued. It's hard for us to relate to people who have been truly disrupted. And of course, African Americans who are always relegated to the margins of the society in terms of the reality of the social indicators of well-being in our country will suffer more and have suffered more. And yet I think have also shown a kind of resilience in being willing to, for example, take the vaccine. That the real problem with vaccine uptake is not in the African American community, it's in the rural non-Black communities. And so these kinds of things indicate that while certainly African Americans, we have been impacted more, because we will be in every case. When America gets a cold, the African American community, as well as others on the margin, get pneumonia. But we have, in fact, been resilient in trying to engage that. I think there are two parts to any coping with a tragedy or trauma, as we all have been traumatized by this pandemic. And one is, as the trauma resolves, as the actual trauma resolves, for us not to expect to feel better because the trauma is resolving. The work for us is to tolerate the residual impact of having gone through a very disturbing period of time. So what I encourage people to do is to give themselves a healthy dose of grace in any way as they reflect upon their own lives. And so the challenge for people first, I think, is to not behave as though this thing has had no impact on you, to expect that impact to continue and to allow yourself the time to process, to not push it away, but to process, allow those feelings to emerge, to process those feelings, to understand that you're not alone, that many, many people are feeling just the way you are. Go forward and enlist the help of the people that you need around you, including professional help when that's necessary, physical and mental, and go on and begin to restart your life.
You know, I was somewhat hopeful that we as a society began to truly recognize the value that people in the healthcare sector, in the food processing sector, again, largely African Americans and people of color, were providing to our society. Do you think we're going to be able to hang on to that consciousness, or do you think we're going to quickly move to another normal?
Well, I think it's going to be hard for us to hang on to that consciousness because we, particularly in this society, have an intractable inclination toward a kind of fundamental exceptionalism that eliminates anything that challenges that exceptionalism from long having our attention. And so I think people who have been radically impacted and have had to reconstruct a life from the shards of a life are not going to get our attention. We just don't want to look at that as a people. We have a kind of survivor's guilt that leads us to turn away from that which disturbs us and disturbs our prevailing narrative. And I think the challenge for us, the survivor's challenge, if you will, is for us to not turn away, to realize that all of us are in this together, that there is no such thing as us and them, that this virus, if it hasn't taught us anything else, then unfortunately, we're going to perish if we don't learn that this is one world. And even though we appear to be doing better in this country, we're not immune.
Well, as a man, particularly, I assume, of Western faith, is that more of an Eastern philosophy? I mean, can we get America to buy into that notion of the collective we?
Well, that's the challenge, Mary Pratt. And it's the reality. The fact is, this virus has defied any categorization of people, of country, of nationality, of class, of race, so to speak. And so if we don't embrace this reality, the reality will prevail. We'll just be lost.
Well, you have been perfect. You've just been perfect. And we can't thank you enough for your wisdom and reflections here on State of Play.
Thank you.
So welcome back to State of Play. Karen and I have been doing a very deep dive in how the pandemic and even post-pandemic environment has really impacted career choices. Now, the takeaway for me, or the startling reality for me at least, was that I knew this pandemic has had its impact. I mean, over 600,000 Americans dead, so many Americans sick. And we know our schedules would change, but it seems to have pulled the covers off of a lot of other issues, a lot of other fissures within our society, and particularly in the area of the workspace.
And, you know, Mayor, I think what's contributed as well as, you know, the pandemic is the dramatic events, George Floyd's murder, and the uproar. And I think that has impacted what people are thinking about in terms of going back to work. You know, it was very interesting to hear our guests talk about, you know, the toxicity in the workplace. These experiences are now getting the light that they should have been getting for years. Now, the question is whether we're going to do anything about it.
Yeah, well, you know, I really appreciated Reverend Ron Hopson because he sort of helped, at least for me, appreciate how this dynamic, this invisible pathogen that had a universal impact, made us look at how in these inequities, these racial dynamics in our society no longer are tolerable. And I think that's had a spillover effect, at least it would seem, in choices about one's career.
Well, and yes, and leaving those careers, right? And starting prosperity market, you know, looking not only at the issues, you know, the pandemic affecting people's lives, affecting people's health, affecting supply chain, also the civil rights issues of Black farmers, Black families, unable to work, unable to eat, and, you know, wanting to do something about that.
I think it put this dynamic where we were forced to come to a screeching halt, put a laser focus on the issues that we are challenged with each and every day. Not just racial strife with policing, but racial strife with one's job. As Monica Torres highlighted, how many people said, look, I'm not dealing with it anymore. I'm not going to go back in that environment and deal with that hostility when I can be more productive being at home where I'm valued.
These are lessons we can't afford to forget. If we don't learn these lessons, if we don't change, you know, as a society, we are just going to continue what is embedded. And what is embedded, you know, in terms of our society is systemic racism.
Well, we've seen America at an inflection point in an awful lot of issues, and I do think the genie was sort of let out of the bottle around the issue of structural racism. And there is a real sense of intolerance and impatience about it. Whether that takes us to better days or whether that takes us to more challenging, disruptive days is yet to be determined. But I think many of our guests helped us better grasp how it is impacting us in some very fundamental ways on our jobs. And I'm glad that we've had this kind of in-depth, thoughtful, reflective conversation with all of these wonderful people here on State of Play.